Okay, perfect. I think we're good to go. Good afternoon or morning or evening, everyone, depending on when you're coming from. Huge thank you for joining us today on a discussion about your guide to proactive tech debt management. This is a lead dev webinar created in partnership with Harness. We're going to spend about 45 minutes or so today talking through this and hearing from our amazing panelists. After that, we'll also head over to the lead dev Slack. There'll be a webinar Q&A channel. We'll hang around in there for a bit longer as well if we don't get to any of your questions or cover a particular topic you're interested in. We will also hopefully have time to take some questions live, so please feel free to submit those via the Zoom Q&A feature, and we'll try and tackle those when we can. So before we dive into the content, I want to start by introducing myself and then the panelists. My name is Jack Franklin. I'm a senior software engineer at Google, where I mostly work on web tooling, primarily Chrome DevTools, a bit of Lighthouse and performance tools as well. The Chrome DevTools, I think, is over 20 years old now as a code base, so I've seen my fair share of technical debt along the way. So today we have three amazing panelists who will be sharing their experience and expertise with you all. So what I'd like to do now is ask them each to introduce themselves. So Lisa, could I ask you first just to say hello, please?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming to hang out with us today. My name is Lisa Schisler-Smith. I'm an engineering manager at Netflix. I run a team called Technology Lifecycle Innovation, which is a lot of words to say we are the digital janitors of our company, focused almost entirely on tech debt and all of its ramifications.
Perfect, thank you. And Reggie, we'll go to you next, please.
Hey everyone, my name is Reginald Davis. I am a senior site reliability engineer, and I've worked previously at Elasticsearch, where I was on the core SRE team as well as the resiliency team. We worked on everything from incident management to service management as well as production readiness for the platform.
Perfect, welcome Reggie. And last but not least, Martin.
Hi, everybody. I'm Martin Reynolds, Field CTO at Harness. I'm actually super excited for this topic today, mostly because in previous roles, I have been responsible for facilitating things like 40-year-old COBOL running in containers in the cloud, and various other long-lived technology stacks that have, and how you keep those updated and fresh and it's a big topic. So I'm excited for this discussion today.
Awesome, thank you, Martin. Yeah, that sounds like an experience I don't want to deal with 40-year-old COBOL on the cloud. So yeah, today we're going to dive into a challenge that I'm pretty sure every single person watching will have dealt with, which is technical debt. We're not talking just about sort of some code that's a bit old. We're also thinking about the accumulated weight of outdated systems, dependencies that are no longer outdated, and maybe even processes in engineering teams that can affect our efficiency and ability to ship. So we're focusing today not only on the pure code, but also on the culture where we can look at addressing tech debt and how we build that into our organizations. One of the topics we'll talk a lot about today is getting sort of buy-in from the company in order to tackle and invest into tech debt, which can be very tricky to do. And how we can balance feature work and shipping and delivering value to our customers and users, along with maintaining some level of code quality that we're happy with. We're also going to touch upon AI, a bit of the hot topic right now. We know, there are a lot of AI tools to help us write code and ship. We want to think about how those may be impacting technical debt, either positively or negatively. Ultimately, hopefully at the end of this webinar, you'll have some information and insight into how to transform tech debt from a liability that drags us all down into something that we can work with and deal with and build a culture where it's tackled with kind of proactively whilst balancing all the other work you have to do. So firstly, I think tech debt as a term is probably very overloaded. I think if you talk to 10 different software developers or people in the field, they would probably give different definitions. So I'd love just to start by hearing from each of our panelists, please, on just how you think about tech debt, how it's defined within your organization, and sort of what is the difference between kind of some bad code or code you don't know very well versus technical debt? Like where does it go from just code you're not familiar with into being a problem that you need to deal with? So I'll go around the room again and we might as well stick to the same order. So Lisa, I'll ask you to come in first, please.
I appreciate you starting with me. So we actually spent some time defining it because you're right. Everybody you ask is going to have a different set of standards, and it's we very clearly at the top of our document say it's not just code you didn't write, which is a very frequent thing that we blame. So we have our definition breaks it down into architecture, maintenance, deployability, operational, security, extensibility, knowledge, and compound. So we take it from every angle. When was the last time it ran? When was the last time you deployed it? When was the last time you patched it? When was the last time you updated it? And all of those factors combined and into the compound debt. Sometimes it's all of those things. And as you might imagine, Netflix has been around for a while. So we have some of our original device protocols, the original steaming protocol still runs and carries traffic. And so we have a lot of things to hang around. We also have legacy devices that we have to deal with. So we have kind of a double situation where we have to support older devices regardless of whether we want to or not. Sometimes we're contractually bound. So we have a lot of factors that go into that, and it makes a very interesting conglomeration of things that can be considered tech debt, but also it gives us clear vision into the things that we need to tackle.
Nice. Yeah, I think just I've forgotten half of the list you just listed there for all the different ways you think about it, but I think that really sums up nicely that there are so many different angles to cover this stuff from. Perfect. And Reggie, we'll go to you next, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Tech debt is always a interesting term. And in my head, we always refer to it as, if a tree falls in the wood and nobody's around, does it make a noise, right? Because a lot of times there's a lot of tech debt around, and a lot of times we work on things that we may not always necessarily need to work on. But a lot of times it's typically the output of when a deadline meets stress, and we end up with a solution that everybody accepts, but nobody really wants. Right. And until it makes some noise, right? That at that point, that's when it really becomes tech debt, right? Because at that point, it's either hindering someone's ability to either release into production or release into an environment, or it's creating some issues for the client. So typically at that point, that's when we really start paying attention to, okay, what can we do to start resolving this issue? And this is the reason, and the reason why we do that is because we don't necessarily be spending a lot of time into things that don't necessarily add value, because sometimes tech debt is there and it's not necessarily creating an issue. You just don't like it. So I think it's important for tech debt to make a little noise before we say, hey, let's allocate some resources to fixing this problem.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think in a previous company I worked for, we used the term churn in terms of how much are we having to deal with this particular code? Because if it's nasty, but we never touch it and it works, then like, what's the value we're going to gain versus, code that's actually slowing us down? Perfect. And last but not least, I promise I won't always come to you last, Martin. But Martin, I'd love to hear how you think about this.
That's okay. I kind of feel like after that, those initial descriptions, there's not a huge amount to add on top of that. Apart from really to say it is everywhere. It's not just the code base. It's the security dependencies, it's the pipelines that you build, it might be the tools that you're using. And I think, as you mentioned near the start, it might be the way you're doing things, right? The technical debt is actually the processes that you're using. So, I think it is a broad thing. And I know we're going to come to more, how do you identify and address those? But, I think it is a broad spectrum, and you have to look at it beyond the code, because sometimes just fixing the code isn't going to fix the problem. Whether that's in terms of, how operational it is, the risk of that particular software when it's being run in a public facing way, all of those things aren't necessarily code changes, they're dependency changes or, architectural changes, which were mentioned. And I was happy to hear that, by the way.
Great. Yeah, I totally agree. I think the code, looking purely at the code, is often a very simplistic view, and reflecting on how it's ended up in that state can often be very insightful. And so I think regardless of what aspect of technical debt we're talking about, whether it's code, a process, a product, or a feature, whatever it may be, I think something a lot of people struggle with, and I know it's been a challenge for me throughout my career, is how do we get buy-in from the business and stakeholders to deal with this? Because often if you're a product manager or a more senior person and your sort of engineering team come to you and say, we'd like to spend X hours, weeks, whatever it may be, on this technical debt that we've accumulated, on one side, maybe that will speed us up. On the other side, that means we're not investing in shipping features or fixing bugs or delivering sort of more value to our users. So, and Reggie, I'll start with you, please. Like, how do we kind of communicate the impact that this debt is having, and sort of get buy-in and demonstrate the value to the important people in the business to give us the space to work on it?
Absolutely. Nah, I've been thinking about this question all week, and my big thing is never let a crisis go to waste. Never let a crisis go to waste. As being a tech lead in my previous role, one of the big things that we really emphasized was taking advantage of incidents, right? Because that's typically the most tangible way to get someone's attention. When it's actually creating impact for users, at this point, now we can actually say, okay, cool, like what's going on here? So as a result, like one big thing that we did was while at Elastic is like we really took those incidents and we started going all in on postmortems, going all the way in on postmortems to the point to where we were diving so deep to where we're really getting to the understanding of like what actually caused this issue, right? And from there, we actually begin to actually track all of these different incidents and all the different services and components and all the things that were happening to. And we really had to push the issue on our stakeholders to say, hey, look, like if you want this, we got to resolve this, right? But we have to actually set some observability and some metrics up around it so that they can actually understand the tangible impact of what was going on. Until you actually have that data on hand, it makes it really, really hard to sell it to your EP or to your director. Because if you're just saying, hey, I feel like we need to work on this, they're going to be like, okay, well, my investors or my leads are telling us we need to work on this. But when you actually have that data on hand and you can take those incidents and you can actually quantify it, actually make it concrete, it makes it a lot easier to actually sell to your stakeholders that, hey, we need to allocate resources to actually fixing this thing, right? And before we can actually go in, deploy new features or new functionality into the platform, let's resolve this issue first so that we don't see this again. Because at the end of the day, if it's making that kind of noise, then you're actually doing a disservice to your clients. You're doing a disservice to your customers.
Yeah, I love that. I love the way you can kind of translate the technical debt that sort of you as a sort of engineers you feel and you know is there, but it's very hard to make that a tangible thing that you can communicate. So I love the idea of kind of collecting data and gathering from instance. I've used that before as well, more proactively on sort of when we need to build or add features to a particular part of a product, saying like, well, the estimate for this is going to, let's say, 8 weeks because we've accumulated this debt. But if we give us 3 or 4 weeks now, then we can halve those future estimates. So if we were thinking of investing in this part of the code base, or this part of the product, that's a good way to do it. So it's kind of similar kind of thing. But yeah, I love kind of putting value to it. Martin, what about you? What's your kind of experience in
Yeah,
this?
it was interesting listening to that, and I do think, in fact, one of my mentors very early in my career told me that numbers will set me free. So and if you have the numbers, you can generally drive what you want, and I do, and like I understand the kind of value of doing those um like tactical approach to solving tech debt, but I think the goal for any engineering organization is helping them understand that actually a sustained investment uh to always be putting time aside for technical debt will help their customers and the end users of that system. So yes, I think take advantage of those points, but actually, look at that, how you put a case forward for that sustained investment, as in, hey, you know what? We just asked you for 4 weeks to fix this thing, but actually, if we'd been investing 10% of our time all the time in keeping our dependencies up to date, making sure our code base is fresh, making sure our processes are reliable, making sure we're fixing the security bugs that come up, then actually those things, that lower level of investments save you those big bursts where you have to delay the feature or delay something else. And it's about translating that like longer term investments to say, hey, it's just something we have to do. It's part of running software. And I think there's ways you can translate that to them too, right? So you can say, hey, the longer we go without keeping our dependencies up to date, the security risk increases. So, the less investment here, the risk breach goes up. Hey, the longer we don't address things that we know are causing performance problems and try and save them up for a big fix, you know what? That's the reduction in the NPS score for the customers who are consuming our products. Hey, you know what? The number of times that we don't fix this pipeline because we have, 15% of our deployments fail, well, that's still making our customers unhappy. But if we were just fixing it as we went along and keeping it up to date and solving them as they came along, the investment is much smaller, the change is much smaller because you're not layering things on top. I think, explaining that and saying, yes, we could keep doing this, spikes, but actually a lower level sustained is, really where you want to be driving to. And it should be part of the culture, ultimately part of the culture investment. Hey, here's my product or service. This is what we're going to deliver over the next year. And 10% of the team's time or 15% of the team's time is going to be spent making sure that we're up to date and everything is secure and reliable. And we're not building up tech debt.
Yeah, I love that. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and also Lisa's thoughts on
Yeah.
because I completely agree with everything you said, and I've been in teams and heard from other people where they all agree that at the start of a particular month or 6 week sprint or however they kind of structure their work, they all say,
I
right,
know
we're
where
going
you're
to
going.
do, you can probably see this, right? I can see Lisa nodding as well. We're going to dedicate 10, 15% or X story points or X hours towards tech debt or dependencies in this workload. But then there's a week until the deadline and the feature isn't quite done yet, or the testing discovers a couple of bugs in the new thing. And then suddenly those things that were the tech debt work get deprioritized and we'll do those next month. And then before you know it, this sort of the ongoing investment, you'll want to do it, but in reality, it never actually happens. Like, how do you kind of instill a sort of culture where that's non-negotiable? Like, that is what we're going to do, and that may mean that we might be a bit late shipping a feature, or it may mean that we have to change things. Like, how do you think about that side of it?
I mean, for us, especially because we have devoted specific resources to solving the tech debt problem. For us, it is very much part of the culture, and it really just has to remain that way. And I think the opportunity cost is the thing that we've leveraged to continue that moving forward. Like, yes, we could do this. And we could skip over the tech debt eradication part of this problem. But if we do, then we end up devoting twice as many resources to the maintenance and upkeep, or it becomes twice as hard for us to implement this new feature. And when you lay out those costs, any good product manager or person who is a launch manager will understand that, like, the trade-off of delaying the launch a week or having to carry this thing forward through in perpetuity, because we all know you're never going to go back. So if you don't fix it now, this is a thing that will continue to haunt you and be more of a resource suck over time. And that's the thing I've also leveraged pretty well, is that eventually it becomes only one or two humans who understand what the complexity of this elderly thing is. And do you want your super senior folks working on the scribbly little bits around the edges, or do you want them leading the newest features? So, like, if I'm saying, honestly, I will tell you, my friend Manny, I was like, Manny's the only person who understands this streaming protocol. He is an L7 engineer. Do we want to leave him working on only this thing and being on call 24/7, 365 for it? Or do we want him leading our new efforts in data exploration that he's an expert in? So, the trade-off there becomes very obvious, and we resource, or we come up with a coordinated solution that solves those sort of things, but we take it with the same seriousness as a feature release.
Yeah, I love that. And when you're kind of a team is sort of planning a chunk of work, I think one things that maybe I've struggled with in the past is if you put in a task on your task manager app of choice that says tech debt, I think it will always be deprioritized a lot. But if you can build that into, as part of building this feature, we need to tackle X, Y, and Z to enable it to be built in the right way or be performant, etc., then I think the chances of that happening increase exponentially based on my experience.
Absolutely.
Nice.
And actually, I think that's an interesting one. I've got to say, from experience, I would never label anything necessarily as tech debt, just because, it is a thing that needs to be fixed, whether it is tech debt or not. And so I do get what you're saying, and I did want to follow on from what Lisa was saying, because it does sound very much like, and we talk about this for almost anything where there's any kind of, culture change. You need the groundswell from below. Most engineers know this stuff needs to be done. You also
Yes.
need the sponsorship from above to, to
Yep.
kind of make that kind of sandwich of, hey, this is sponsored. The leadership believe this is the right thing to do. Engineers from the groundswell from the bottom believe it's the right thing to do. Normally you get, that kind of, you then get that balance in the middle of making sure that work is getting done. And you need both sides, right? You will get the groundswell from below because engineers just get frustrated.
Yes.
If we can just fix this, things will be better, right? And then, from above, they want that consistency of delivery. And the best way to get consistency of delivery is to be able to deal with that tech debt as you go along.
Yeah, totally agree.
I really hope you're enjoying this video. Do you know Lead Dev offers way more than this?
I'm a fan of the Lead Dev newsletter. I find really practical knowledge about leadership.
Then I was like, oh, there is this big community here doing all of these content, so let me figure out a little more. Let me dig in a little. What do you have?
So make sure you check out leaddev.com.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about tech debt, we've talked a lot about tackling tech debt, but another side of the same coin is how do you avoid accumulating tech debt on a regular basis as you're building and shipping features, and maybe how can we find the balance of doing that? Reggie, in your experience, have you found any useful strategies for not sort of rapidly accumulating huge new chunks of tech debt as you work on let's say features or product releases?
Oh yeah, it's a lot that's going on in this question. And I think one of the biggest things that we had to change in regards to our process, because one thing that Martin mentioned earlier, which I unequivocally agree with, is that all tech debt does not come in the form of like actual just code, right? A lot of it is cultural. And so one of the big things that we had to shift while we were at Elastic is the way we introduce services into a platform. And so one big thing that we did was just our production readiness reviews, right? So actually setting up the observability and the measuring and the monitoring of these new services so that we actually understand like, hey, what's actually happening before we actually put this thing out there into the zeitgeist, right? Because I think sometimes we put things out there, you'll put something out there and you don't completely understand what's out there in the wild, right? It's creating these issues, or you're hearing this feedback from customers and you're saying, okay, well, what's going on? And then you may find out, oh, okay, well, we didn't necessarily instrument it with telemetry, or we didn't necessarily instrument it with all the necessary metrics data that we need, right? And so a lot of times it begins at the very beginning and actually designing it to understand like, okay, what exactly do we need to monitor on this side? But once you go from there, right, the next thing really does become like actually having effective processes in regards to dealing with the tech debt. Right. And it's not, like I said, it's not always just about, okay, we need to make the most beautiful code and have all of the greatest tests, because you're going to miss things. That's just kind of how this thing works. And so as a result, like it's almost like a balance of, okay, ensuring that we try to understand this service, right, as best as we can before we put it out there into the world. And the other side of it is ensuring that we actually have a solid process in place to deal with this tech debt. Like a lot of times people have incidents and they're not actually doing the postmortems, or they're not actually paying attention to what was coming out of the meetings and things like that. It just happens. We resolve the incident and then we just go away. But if you're not taking those items, if you're not taking those action, those follow-up items from those incidents and saying, hey, look, this is going on your backlog, right? And these are going to have just as much priority, or these story points are going to be just as valuable as the story points on delivering that functionality, right? Then a lot of times that stuff just goes on the wayside. But once again, like that's a relationship that has to be built between your stakeholders and the team, and saying, hey, look, this is what we agreed upon, right? Like if we're going to go out and put this thing, we're going to put this service out, at least give us an opportunity to go and fix this stuff when the stuff pops up, versus allowing that debt to kind of accumulate in a backlog. And next thing you know, you got somebody on board in the team. They're like, well, what is this ticket? And it's like, oh yeah, don't worry about that. Like you don't want to kind of build this mentality of like, oh, okay, like it's just gonna sit there on the backlog and nobody's gonna pay attention to it. Like there has to be processes to actually deal with this thing. As Martin said, I'd rather take 10% every sprint or every marathon, whatever you want to call it, and actually put it towards like handling this technical debt, versus like, okay, well, we hit the end of the sprint and we ain't got the feature finished yet, so I guess we just gonna not pay attention to it. No, like you should be held accountable for what's on that backlog as well.
Yeah, so it's like defining, as I think a sort of theme of all the answers so far, we've talked a lot about code, but we've also talked a lot about the culture and the buy-ins. Like culturally, you need to have the almost permission, I suppose, or as Martin put it, sponsorship from leadership. And no, we after there's an incident in your case, we have these items that we need to tackle, and they have to be fixed. Like it's a non-negotiable. I think that's the bit, from my experience, a lot of people struggle with, is it always ends up being the first thing to be dropped.
I would even argue, I would even say this. I think engineers need to get a little bit more radical in the way that they handle technical debt, right? I think we need to be a little bit more brash, because at the end of the day, we own that. Like we are accountable for this. And I think sometimes as engineers, we can be very passive when it comes to these kinds of things. And I think these are the times where we need to really advocate and advocate as much as we can to like, hey, we really want to get this thing done. And if we're not advocating for resolving this technical debt, then a lot of times, like to a stakeholder, they're just like, okay, well, maybe it's not that important to them. But sometimes you gotta almost be it's like a kid. It's like when a kid want to play with a toy or they want to do something, they're gonna just keep knocking on their door. Hey, 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 I want to play with this. I want to play with this. I want to play with this. And sometimes they'll annoy you until they get what they want. And I feel like sometimes as engineers, we got to do the same way.
Yeah, that actually that's a really interesting point, and also aligns with a question we had that I thought we could cover now from, I think, Sarah. Do you create tech debt reports for the team or leadership? Like, how do you get that information? How do you organize it? Like, what is your, okay, so there's a thing you want to pitch tech debt wise, we need to solve this. What's your strategy for wrapping that up? Like, I think we've touched upon it. What numbers are you getting? How are you kind of communicating the impact on developer productivity? And I'll leave that. Reggie, I guess, do you want to start?
Yeah, for sure. I think before taking on any new features or functionalities or anything like that, I think there should always be some tech debt reconnaissance done, right? Because typically when you're taking on new features or any new functionality that you want to deploy, a lot of times you kind of begin with, okay, how do we get it done? But before the how do we get it done, you need to also recognize that, hey, are there things that may block us from achieving our set deadline or things of that nature? And report those things before the work begins, right? So, a lot of times, like I said, we put a lot of energy into the build, right? But I think we should put a lot of energy also into like what is going to be required of us to maintain this code or maintain the solution once we put it out in the wild. And those need to report it up, because a lot of times what I've noticed is when dealing with leadership, it's a lot easier to get them to buy in when I come to you at the beginning and say, hey, this is the issue that I foresee, right? And if I foresee this issue, can we get some time, or can we kind of extend this out a little bit more so that we can resolve this issue early, versus you get in the middle of it, you just begin working on a solution, and then in the middle of the solution, you're like, oh, okay, we're going to need to do this, right? Like that kind of becomes that part of like, that's where that seniority and the experience really kind of comes in. Because if I can give you as much information up front in regards to what I might end up dealing with before I begin, typically it's a lot easier for them to kind of deal with, because if they got to report that up to their lead or to your skip, right, it becomes a lot easier for them to have that conversation, versus you get in the middle of the sprint and then you hit the roadblock and all of a sudden say, okay, well, we got to do this before we get to this.
Yeah.
So we're actually building a system to demonstrate a score for your tech debt. We have a centralized software catalog that we leverage, and we're building the score based on the tech debt definition that I ran through at the beginning, and also our applied tech debt principles. And so every piece of software in our system will acquire this tech debt score, and it's not just the score of the piece of software that you're managing. It's also traversing our overall resource graph, and it will roll up if it's built on an insecure system, if it has an insecure or unstable dependencies, that will also increase the score. So there'll be a bright, shiny number when you land on your piece of software in the catalog that you can click into and see what's making up that tech debt score. So at a high level, it will give information to people that you can sell it to. Gosh, look at our terrible score. We need to get on this. But when you click on it, it will give you the insights that any engineer can dive into and further explore to see what the actionable steps are to eradicating that tech debt. And it may be that you have to coordinate across dependencies, but we'll also use our centralized system to launch. We have a campaign system now. We can identify critical threats or stuff that everybody needs to act on all at once, and we can launch campaigns from it too. So we're going, kind of throwing technology at more technology, but you can also leverage tags in your favorite task management system. Jira has a really good system of tags and subtags, so you can add a tag of tech debt and then further subtag it as some of the classifications, and then you can see over time how you're actually affecting that. As you work through the tasks in your system, you can have burn down charts specifically around tech debt. So being able to demonstrate it and show it very visibly is a really powerful tool to continuing to get that leverage and that buy-in.
Yeah,
At least, sorry, go for it, Martin.
I was just going to say that was, I'm glad she said that. I was literally going to say something similar, just because there is that ability, yes, you can tag it, and you can actually automate a lot of that tagging, right?
Yes,
You can
absolutely.
automate a lot of the tagging that happens. You can say, hey, do you know what? This is a new CVE that is come in, so it is already tech that, hey, your dependency is now more than 2 versions behind the latest release, so now there is tech debt. Hey, this has been identified as part of an incident, so it's tech debt. There is a bunch of stuff that you can do that is automated. There is always some stuff that is manual, if that makes sense, but that tagging is super powerful because then you can drive it. And it's funny that you described that, because I was going to mention, the same way that we might publish a security score against the service in, for example, like an internal developer portal, and like a process score and a resiliency score around the SRE, you can actually use those to build out your tech debt score, which is exactly what you're doing. And that is, I think that is the right approach. I want to be able to look at my service that I'm responsible for. I want to be able to see the upstream and downstream services that are impacted by it, because then I can say, hey, my service is great, but these guys' service over here, should I still be using that service? Do I need to go and talk to that service owner and say, hey, what are you doing about this? Because right now I'm dependent on you, and you're not up there in terms of your tech debt, your resiliency, it's that same thing. And what that actually does is, ideally, it builds community, because often the outcome of that is, how can we help you solve that problem so that we can get a better service from you, right? And then you start to build that community, and it becomes part of the culture, if that makes sense. I don't think you can force a culture change, but doing the work drives the culture change. So if you start doing the work, and the way you're working, then you actually drive the culture change that gets actually what you want. And that's where you want it to be. You want to be able to deliver new features and great shiny things, but you want to be able to do it in a way that's reliable and everybody's getting the best in the community of the organization that you're working in.
Love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we actually had a couple of questions about backlogs of tech debt and how you prioritize that. I think Lisa and Martin, I think you just kind of summed that up perfectly, sort of assigning some form of priority, or in your case, a score to it, sounds like the kind of right way to deal with that. Another question that also touched upon a topic I wanted to ask about as well was, at what point with technical debt do you potentially have to take a step back and say, okay, this particular code is a nightmare, or this particular feature is a nightmare, or it depends on some library that hasn't been touched for 5 years and has numerous security concerns. And so when do you actually step back and think, we need to do a bigger piece of work to, let's say, rewrite it or move from dependency A to dependency B or something? So we're not talking here incremental improvements to part of the product. We're talking about a much bigger dedicated effort. Some might even call it a rewrite, which I know is a controversial topic in tech debt world. Lisa, is this something you've come across?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I started at Netflix, I inherited a team that was working on internal tooling, and we were building a lot of very pretty garbage. We were cranking it out very, very quickly, but it was extremely unreliable, and our users were our stunning colleagues. And so we were giving them sort of substandard tools. And I heard one particular one that had a very specific deadline, our 360 feedback tool. And it comes out at a certain time every year. That deadline is unmovable. The entire company uses it all the way up to the CEO. And so we were engaged in the feature set upgrade for that year. And I had 2 engineers on the team. One was a veteran of the company, one was brand new. And the veteran was like, we have to keep on the path that we're on because we have a deadline. And the new engineer was like, we need a complete rewrite. They were both correct. So what we did for that session was we pushed through, we got it done, but we had to sort of handhold it the entire time it was out in the wild for that cycle. But what we did was catalog all the places that we knew to be unstable and what our plan would be once the cycle closed. And we burnt it down and started over and rebuilt it. The investment in that has now paid off probably tenfold, because in the last 4 years, we've not had to do another rewrite. The new feature sets have been able to be added in much more quickly. And so it wasn't immediately obvious how that was going to play out. I did take a wee bit of a gamble there by saying that we do need to start this over. And my boss at the time did not agree with me. And so it was a hard sell. But in the subsequent years, I actually had the engineer who, it's down to one engineer from a team of 7 people. It's down to one engineer to be able to support the new feature set. He said he was able to get this year's features in under a week. And so I think that kind of story, when you can tell that sort of powerful story, then it makes sense. There are plenty of times when people are like, I just want to rebuild this because I want it to be my code, and that is not the right path forward. So what you have to evaluate there is, what is the benefit? What is the long-term ROI on rebuilding this thing? Does it give you stability in a feature set that you don't have anymore? Does it leverage more current technology that is more forward-looking? You know, is it more deployable, easily containable? Does it have more, completeness around it so that it can stand alone by itself and be supported? Those are all really great questions to ask, very much like you would ask if you were deploying any new feature. So go through the cost benefit analysis, do the product work on it beforehand, and decide what you're going to get at the other end, and decide if that's the right mix that you can get. I had the luxury of being able to shut the thing off and burn it down and start over. That's not always the case for a thing. So if you're trying to do that parallel, you might spin up a second team to try to help move that thing forward. You might throw more resources at it, but it definitely is, you got to evaluate it hard, and you have to spend a lot of time thinking about it, the investment beforehand, before you just jump in and be like, burn it down.
Yeah, I will follow on from that, because you're absolutely right, and there is nuances. You heard me mention the COBOL thing earlier, and I'm going to use that as an example because it was a great example. What we had was reliable on-premise software that had been working for years, that had refined, tested code base. It was millions and millions and millions of lines of code. And it wasn't bad code. It didn't have technical debt. It was just what felt like old technology. However, innovating around that and allowing us to keep all that good stuff that the customers loved, but being able to present it with a modern web front end and, expand it with microservices while keeping that core, is what made sense in that particular solution, right? And, that solution is still running now, and it's a great service and a great product, right? However, there were other products that I worked on where, the challenges became, this is no longer scalable for the number of customers that we have. We need to do something different because, the service is starting to degrade. And then it's okay, well, what will that take? And sometimes you're right. You are lucky if you can do the big bang rewrite. Actually what happens is, in that particular case I'm thinking of right now, that was a very big monolith, and we used to have, there was like Pizza Thursday for doing those deployments every time we wanted to do a new version, and turning the system off for all the customers because that was the only way to do it, to actually moving to, okay, where are the seams in that application, and how do we migrate those into something more modern, more maintainable, so you're actually pulling chunks out of the monolith and shrinking the monolith. Will the monolith ever go away? Probably not. Do you know why? Because there's some core functionality that actually, once you take all the other load away, it almost becomes another service, even though it was the monolith, if that makes sense. So it is very, very different with different things. And I've kind of seen, and you do have to look at the value for each. And I would say it's the same with processes too, by the way. One of the most common things we come across, and I have a colleague, and he will say, one of the things we often see with processes, especially with build and deployments, is that if you have 3,000 services, he said, you have 3,000 pipelines, right? All different. And, he will say, if you were building an airport, would you build 3,000 runways because you wanted to have 3,000 planes land? You would absolutely not do that. You would build a few good runways and all the planes would use them. And it's the same kind of thing. How much time do you want to spend maintaining all the different things when you could maintain consistently? And then it overlaps into, you know, how you deploy and where you deploy to, and how you build those services to leverage things like secure landing zones. And but so I think it's all an extension of the same thing, but I think, you know, there's no one answer for any one solution. Sometimes it's piece by piece, sometimes it's big bang, sometimes it's, you know, but there is quite often always an event that drives that, you know, whether that is, you know, I know for myself and actually for some of our customers now, they will start to put in policies that say, hey, do you know what, when if a dependency hasn't been maintained and it's an open source dependency for more than 6 months, you can't use it. Okay, well, that suddenly means that we've got a bunch of dependencies that we're using that are actually out of our policy. And what do we do with that? You know, so there's again, while it's a manufactured trigger point, it's not a trigger point. Do we now say, do you know what, we're just going to own that? We're going to fork that dependency and own it. Are we going to choose a different dependency? You know, there's lots of different routes. But I do think, you know, there's many things, and sometimes maturity in software delivery is what drives the change, you know, in and of itself.
Yeah, maturity is definitely is a big factor, both in terms of software and also I think individuals. I think I look back to myself when I was 22, just out of university, first company. I spent weekends rewriting bits of the code I didn't like, and looking back, you know, I was just a naive young, you know, first engineer, investing in a lot of work in a lot of places that made absolutely no visible impact or difference to the productivity of the team. But yeah, it's really interesting to see how you think about that. I think, you know, there's a big case. A lot of people are very excited to do a rewrite in the latest and greatest technology, you know, new front-end framework, new back-end language that's more performant, etc. But those are hairy things to do if they're not done very well and very carefully. So yeah, thank you for sharing your insights on those. We have a few more minutes. I'm aware there are a bunch of questions. I hope some of them we have covered through the conversation. If not, we will be jumping into Slack afterwards, and we'll kind of talk. We can answer questions there too. So please don't worry if we haven't got to yours yet. I do want to end in these last 3 minutes with a very quick look at how you've all found the use of AI on your work around tech debt. You know, there's been a proliferation of AI tooling over the past. I've lost track of when AI became a very prominent thing, 2-3 years or so, and I think some of that. In my personal experience, I've had some really great, impactful, productive uses of AI. I've also had some that have not been so helpful. And so, Martin, I'll start with you rather than leave you to last, as always. What has your experience been using these tools?
I think they've matured quite well. I think at first there was a lot of claims that claimed to fix many things and didn't really fix anything, if that makes sense. So I think they've improved, but now, you know, where we're seeing probably the most successful uses are things like, you know, auto remediation of CVEs, for example, you know, in as much that, hey, here's the security vulnerability that's been raised. Here's how you fix it. Here's the pull request ready to go with that change in place. You know, so keeping on top of like the security debt part of your technical debt, I've seen that done quite well. I've also seen it, you know, used in terms of, you know, improving process. We recognize could be better in your process. We can spill your build by parallelizing. There's all sorts of different things where I've seen it being used. Even within that kind of, you know, I'm working on tech debt and I'm using one of the code agents, and can you explain this code back to me? Right? Because sometimes some of that code hasn't been worked on for a long time. And going back to what we talked about, it's not my code. And sometimes the documentation is thin. Like, let's use that word. Sometimes the documentation is thin, you know, and actually sometimes, you know, Gen AI explicitly can be really useful in explaining that context. And also, you know, kind of helping it. I've seen the kind of semantic search approach of, okay, so show me the authentication code rather than where do I find that authentication code? And all of that is, you know, helping kind of understanding and accelerating the delivery and the remediation of security issues. So in general, I think it's good to great and constantly improving. And I think, you know, if you're not using it across the whole software delivery lifecycle, where it's appropriate for you, you know, including like summarizing of incidents, we heard that earlier, that's a great use as well. You know, all of those things are great uses. I'm seeing them used more and more, you know, across across the tools. We're certainly building them, and I know lots of other people are too. I think it makes real sense to leverage those tools to shorten the time to solving the problems of tech debt, make it faster, make it easier, make it more reliable, and also help you identify where you need to do that.
Yeah, I completely agree. So I would love to hear what everyone else thinks. We are out of time, so I'll wrap it up there. As I said, we'll be in the Slack channel. So yeah, so thank you to all three of you, to Lisa, Reggie, and Martin for your input, hearing your expertise. It's so, I mean, I could spend another hour easily talking to you all about this. There's so many different facets of what makes up technical debt. And for everyone who joined and is watching at home, thank you very much for coming along and listening to us. Hope you found this interesting and insightful. As we said, we'll be in Slack now for a little bit of time in the webinar Q&A chat. So please feel free to jump into there if you have any additional questions. The questions that I can see had popped up on Zoom we didn't get to, we'll also talk about there as well. So thanks for joining, and we hope to see you next time for another webinar very soon. Have a great rest of your day or evening, wherever you are. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.